And equalities. Bobby Dean.
Question number 1, please.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We understand that energy bills are a concern for many people. We believe the only way to protect bill payers permanently, including disabled people, is to accelerate the green transition towards homegrown clean energy. We are continuing to work closely with energy suppliers to ensure that vulnerable customers are supported.
Bobby Dean.
I thank the Minister for her answer. In my constituency of Carshalton and Wallington, Scope Research estimates that disabled households face bills of up to £1,500 a month more than the average household. We also know that disabled households are much less likely to claim the benefits that they're entitled to. So I'd like to know if the Equalities Office has made any assessment on the potential disproportionate impact on disabled households of the cut to the winter fuel allowance.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. An equality analysis was released in September and the government carried out its statutory duties in doing so, but I do recognise the wider concerns that he raises, especially around the additional costs faced by many disabled people. That's why the Minister for Energy Consumers recently met with suppliers to address some of these issues, and I would encourage all of those who need extra support to sign up to the Priority Services Register.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The disabled people are also concerned about the use of AI in government departments under previous government, including within the DWP. So with the UN's report on AI governance recently, what discussions has the Minister had with other colleagues across the different departments on the principles, the equity principles that will be integrated in the government's use of AI?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. Discussions are ongoing across government, including with my right honourable friend who represents DSIT. There are wider opportunities and challenges that technology presents us, and we want to make sure that we get the balance right.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Further to the question that my honourable friend asked, DWP statistics say that 45% of people over the state pension age have a disability. And as we've already heard, they can face hugely inflated energy costs because of the need for equipment such as stair lifts, extra fridges, oxygen tanks, all of which demand electricity. So in the discussions which the Minister has outlined, have they given any consideration to the introduction of a social tariff to help mitigate the extra costs that disabled people face in this country?
The Honourable Lady will recognise the very difficult state of the public finances that we inherited and the tough choices that were necessary in order to stabilise our economy. And these were decisions that were not easy. What I would say to her is that my honourable friend, the Member for Energy Consumers, is leading on much of this work to ensure that we secure a fairer deal for all consumers, because we do want to ensure that all support is targeted at the most vulnerable groups who need support this winter.
Joe White.
Question 2, Mr. Speaker.
Annalise.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I will answer questions 2, 8, 11 and 12 together. My colleagues and I are working closely together to tackle the national emergency of violence against women and girls and to deliver our mission to halve violence against women and girls in a decade. We've begun our work to make streets, homes and workplaces safer for women by announcing that domestic abuse specialists will be placed in emergency control rooms and that adult victims of rape in England and Wales will get access to free legal advocates.
Joe White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, like many mothers, had to bring up my daughters to be cautious of men, their motives, language and behaviour. Sadly, many of our daughters still have to learn the hard way, with one of mine taking years to recover from the assault she experienced as a school child. Misogynistic attitudes and behaviours are often learned, tolerated and reinforced whilst in school. In recent times, social media influencers are driving this, embedding women hatred into our culture. Can I ask the Minister how they are tackling this rising challenge in schools, and will this be embedded into the curriculum across all ages?
Secretary.
I completely agree with my honourable friend that misogyny must be tackled, and I know the whole House will want to say we were deeply concerned to hear about her daughter's experience. Clearly, statutory RSHE is essential to tackling misogyny. There must be clear guidance on teaching it, which is why we're carefully considering consultation responses and evidence to ensure new guidance meets the needs of students and teachers. And the Independent Curriculum and Assessment Review will carefully consider how RSHE fits in with the wider curriculum as part of their work. We must tackle misogyny from the start. That means in schools, also online and across society.
Caroline Bolden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the recent high-profile allegations of appalling abuse which many women suffered in their workplace, which have...
Order. Please, the member's asking a question. Shouldn't walk in front of members. Carry on, please.
Given the recent high-profile allegations of appalling abuse of women in their workplace, which have been all over the news, what steps is the government planning to protect women who come forward with allegations of such abuse in the future, particularly in the workplace?
Secretary.
Very grateful to the honourable member for raising that incredibly important question, and I think many of us have been deeply concerned by some of the stories that have come to public light. We are determined as a new government to strengthen the legal duty around sexual harassment so that employers take all reasonable steps to stop sexual harassment before it starts. We'll also require, Mr. Speaker, employers to create and maintain workplaces and working conditions free from harassment, including by third parties.
Mike Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My predecessor, Greg Clark, brought a bill before the House to make it illegal to harass women in public. The Protection from Sex-Based Harassment in Public Bill received royal assent in September of last year. However, the Act is not in force because the Secretary of State needs to pass a statutory instrument to make regulations to allow that to happen. So it's legal plumbing, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister undertake to write to me and update me when that work will be done and when this important Act will come into force?
Secretary.
I would be very happy to write to the honourable member when it does indeed come into force. And to be absolutely clear, this new government is determined to have violence against women and girls within a decade. That includes on the street as well as in workplaces and homes. And I know the Home Secretary takes that incredibly seriously too. So she is working with us on this. Thank you.
Dr. Rupert Hoke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Women welcome this government finally implementing buffer zones around abortion clinics, as repeatedly voted for by MPs in this House. So can the Minister tell me when, and will it apply to those silently intimidating, knowingly or not, at the clinic gates, as the Tories were trying to scrap that bit on the slide?
Secretary.
I thank my honourable friend for her important question, and I also pay tribute to her and my honourable friends, the Home Secretary and the Minister for Crime and Policing, along with others across the House who've campaigned on this issue for years. The new government has been able to finally take urgent steps to address this issue. Protection zones around abortion clinics will be in force from the 31st of October, the end of this month. This government is determined that anyone exercising their legal right to access abortion services should be free from harassment and intimidation, and the police will now have the power to deal with anyone they reasonably suspect to be obstructing, causing harassment or distress, or influencing within a buffer zone.
Shadow Minister Mims-Davies.
Firstly, may I welcome the ministerial team to their places. The Conservative government launched the £100 million VORG strategy, determined our streets are made safer for women and girls, creating a new 24/7 sexual assault helpline, transport safety champions, a £5 million safety of women at night fund. Why does this Labour government feel setting a target of merely halving violence against women and girls is a suitable ambition? Nothing, Mr. Speaker, but targeting the total eradication of this horrific criminality, whether in the home or on the streets, is surely enough.
Minister.
Well, the reality is, Mr. Speaker, that we saw reported rates of different forms of violence against women and girls rising repeatedly under the previous government, and charge rates falling shamefully low. This government will not stand by in the face of that national emergency. We will act. That is why we have set a cross government mission. No more talk, but action, Mr Speaker, and we are determined to deliver it for the sake of women and girls.
Jill German.
Question number 3, Mr Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And with your permission, I will answer questions 3 and 13 together. This government is committed to breaking the link between young people's backgrounds and their future success, and I am proud to lead our opportunity mission across government, through which we will ensure that every child thrives in education and achieves their ambitions in work and later life, no matter what their background.
Jill German.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In Wales, breaking down barriers to opportunity has long been an area of work. But with so many levers of change at the hands of a UK Tory government, success over the last 14 years has been greatly hampered. Can my right honourable friend assure me that Cabinet colleagues in this government will work closely with Welsh Government partners so that future earnings in Clwyd North reflect the huge potential I see in our children and young people every day?
Yes, Mr Speaker, I can give my honourable friend that assurance. We will work very closely with devolved governments to make sure that we are all pulling together to break down those barriers that too many of our young people face at the moment. And that's why the work that I'm leading with the DWP Secretary on child poverty is so crucial, because we know child poverty is an issue that blights too many lives right across the UK.
Dr Becky Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Coastal areas, such as my own constituency of Worthing West, experience lower life expectancy and higher levels of preventable ill health compared with many non-coastal areas. This is directly related to the fact that they often have higher levels of socio-economic deprivation. Could I ask my right honourable friend, what steps is she taking to address these specific inequalities in coastal communities?
My honourable friend is a real champion for her constituents and for coastal communities, and I do recognise the sometimes distinct challenges that can exist in different communities. Work is already underway to make sure that where you're from doesn't determine what you can succeed, but I'd be very happy to discuss that further with my honourable friend.
Lucy Smart.
Thank you very much. Young carers, young people in my community with care experience are campaigning for care and care experience to be classified as a protected characteristic. Will the Minister meet with them and with me to discuss whether this government plans to bring this forward?
We're looking very carefully at what more we need to do to make sure that all care experienced young people receive the support that they need. We know that outcomes are incredibly poor on many occasions, and we do recognise the disadvantage that care experienced young people face. We're looking at what more we can do, both in terms of legislation and beyond that, to ensure that all young people get the support that they deserve. And I'll make sure that my colleague from the Department for Education, the Minister for Children and Families, is in touch with the Honourable Lady.
Jim Shannon.
Mr Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for her answer to that question, a very important question. What discussions has the Minister had with the DFC back home in Northern Ireland to ensure that individuals from all socio-economic backgrounds have equal opportunities in terms of pay regardless of where they free up? Thank you very much.
I'm afraid I'd just say to the Honourable Gentleman, I didn't catch all of that question, but what I would say is I'm happy to discuss it with him further, but I've met with my counterparts in Northern Ireland. I do recognise the shared challenges that we face and want to make sure we're working constructively across the devolved governments on areas of concern.
Colour on.
Number 4, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, we want a more inclusive society with less discrimination, and our election manifesto committed us to putting the views and voices of disabled people at the heart of all we do. As a first step, we're legislating to deliver equal pay for disabled people with disability pay gap monitoring for larger employers.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A huge part of tackling discrimination against disabled people is challenging preconceptions about what people can achieve. And will the Minister therefore join me in congratulating the phenomenal Joseph Adams, a 21-year-old with Down syndrome in my constituency, who recently ran 10 10Ks in 10 different countries in just 5 days as part of his No Limits Challenge, who's raised a staggering £400,000 for a disability sports and employment programme in my community.
I'm delighted to congratulate Joseph and welcome my honourable friend drawing his achievements to our attention. I would just say I spent an inspiring few days at the Paralympics in Paris not long ago, partly inspiring because we came second behind only China, ahead of the USA, ahead of all the other European countries as well. And my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the importance of this. We are going to work with disabled people and their organisations to make sport more accessible and remove the barriers which too often are in place at the moment.
Richard Holden.
Question number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The CAS review is a robust report backed by clinicians and firmly grounded in evidence. The Government and NHS England will be implementing Dr Cass's recommendations in full so that children and young people get the safe, holistic care and support they need.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank the Minister for that answer. Dr Cass's review was an important moment for services for young people, particularly in this country. Will the Minister restate the Government's commitment to ensuring that all of the findings of the review are implemented, a review based on evidence ahead of ideology, and would the Minister also reject calls from various vested interest groups to pause implementation at the moment and press ahead as quickly as possible in order to protect vulnerable young people in our country?
Mr. Speaker, as I said in my original answer, the Government is absolutely committed to implementing all of Dr Cass's review, evidence-based review, absolutely in full.
Tony on the outset.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Minister for the response and for the robust response that this Labour government has taken to support the cash review. But can she confirm with me that she is having robust conversations with devolved governments around the implementation of this across the United Kingdom?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her question. The Secretary of State has met with and discussed with leaders of all the devolved administrations our intention to work with them very closely across all issues that come under our sphere, and that would include the recommendations of CAS.
Shadow Minister John Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I thank the Minister for taking up the recommendations in the CAS review. And children struggling with their gender identity deserve our protection and a holistic, understanding approach via our new NHS centres rather than irreversible medical and surgical intervention. So can the Minister confirm to this House that the BMA's original position that the CAS review contained unsubstantiated recommendations will not delay that protection being put in place for vulnerable children? Thank you.
Minister.
I can't reiterate any more strongly than I have that this government is absolutely committed to implementing the CAS review evidence-based recommendations in full.
Becky Gittins.
6, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As part of our mission to make work pay, we will provide protections from maternity discrimination and sexual harassment, will speed up progress on the gender pay gap, and will strengthen equal pay protections. The step we will take will enable women everywhere to thrive and transform their working lives for the better.
Becky Gittins.
I'd like to thank the Minister for that response and ask whether she agrees with me that, unlike some of the comments we've heard from the opposition leadership contenders this week that are incredibly worrying, does she agree with me that in order to grow our economy, we need to create the conditions to encourage and support more women back into the workplace?
I strongly agree with my honourable friend that supporting women to return and progress at work is a crucial part of securing economic growth. Very surprising it was even in doubt, indeed. And this Labour government is on the side of new mothers, which is why our plan to make work pay commits to strengthening their workplace protections, improving access to flexible working and creating the conditions for all parents to balance work and care.
Carl Lockhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 4 women have been brutally killed in the last 6 weeks in Northern Ireland, bringing the total to 24 since 2020. Many of these young women were professional women working and contributing to society. Would the Minister agree that we need to do more than just pay lip service to supporting women, whether it be in the home or in the workplace, to actually punish these perpetrators?
Minister.
I absolutely agree with the honourable member, and it's extremely concerning whenever we hear of exactly what has happened to women, whether it's in the home, in the workplace or on the street. Women deserve to be safe, so do girls. That's why this government is acting at pace, making sure that, for example, in emergency rooms we have specialists on domestic abuse, making sure we have specialist rape crisis centres, and making sure we work across the whole of the United Kingdom on these shared concerns for the sake of women and girls.
Thank you. Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today marks the start of Baby Loss Awareness Week. It's a difficult and important time for many of our constituents and for those of us who have experienced baby loss or miscarriage. Many private sector employers, and now the NHS, the largest public sector employer of women, have led the way in offering paid bereavement leave for those who miscarry. Does the Minister agree that all workers could and should benefit from the right to bereavement leave following baby loss?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for raising this question. I'd like to congratulate her, of course, on her election as chair of the Women and Equality Select Committee. And of course, she has campaigned for many, many months and indeed years on this issue of baby loss, as have other members across the House. I'm very pleased to see that progress amongst some major employers, and I know she will want to work with us on ensuring that those who experience baby loss are supported and protected, particularly at the most difficult times. Thank you.
Dame Meg Hillier on topicals.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
So stay.
Mr. Speaker, this Black History Month, I would like to reiterate that people's race or ethnicity should never be a barrier to opportunity. We are enhancing rights through upcoming legislation on race and disability equality, employment rights and banning conversion practices. To deliver this important work, we are reforming the Equality Hub to create the Office for Equality and Opportunity in the Cabinet Office. There is much to do working within and beyond government to create opportunity and promote equality across the UK.
Dame Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've had some progress since this government was elected on issues relating to black and minority ethnic women and domestic violence. However, Valerie Ford was my constituent, was brutally murdered by her partner, and Valerie's law, named for her and campaigned for by her daughter and the charity Sister Space in my constituency, has not yet hit the statute books. And I wonder if the Secretary of State could reconsider, examine the support needed for women because of their ethnic and racial background. Thank you.
Thursday.
I pay tribute to my right honourable friend and her campaigning work. I pay tribute to my right honourable friend for all of the campaigning work that she has done in this crucial area in the face of the tragic loss of Valerie Ford. We must do everything that we can to make sure that all victims of violence against women and girls receive the support that they need, and I'll make arrangements for her to discuss this further with the Home Office Minister around what more we need to do around police training and standards in particular.
Ms Davis.
The Conservative government introduced the hugely successful opt-out HIV and hepatitis testing programme for A&Es in London, Brighton, Blackpool and Manchester, with a £20 million commitment to expand the programme to 33 more, diagnosing more than 1,300 people with HIV in the first 2 years, tackling health inequalities, meaning crucially, Mr. Speaker, more LGBT plus people, women, people of black African ethnicity, older people as well, were diagnosed and supported. Can the Secretary of State assure the House the funding and commitment remains?
What I would say to the right honourable lady is that I thank her for raising such an important issue where I think we all want to make progress across this House. Officials are working on further plans. We will be setting them out very shortly, but we will be keen to work with her and colleagues across the House to make sure that we eradicate new HIV and AIDS infections.
Steve Blaze.
Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents in Exeter benefit from maternity pay, which supports women while they spend precious time with their newborn children. Is the Minister of the view that maternity pay, in the words of a Tory leadership candidate opposite, has gone too far?
Absolutely not. And my honourable friend is right to mention the fact that that kind of assessment not only flies in the face of common sense, but also flies in the face of all the economic evidence. Because when we support women to return to work and to progress at work while being able to spend time with their families, we grow our economy, something this government is determined to do.
Wendy Bourne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Across Aldridge Brown Hills, we have some fabulous girls' football teams and the excellent Walsall Wood Ladies Football Club at Oak Park Active Living Centre, no doubt inspired by the Lionesses. The last government committed funding to support women and girls' football. Can the Minister confirm that this funding will continue?
I can assure the right honourable lady that we are absolutely determined to encourage young women and girls to take part in sport and physical activity, something that falls off all too often as girls reach their teenage years. And in my work in the Department for Education, through the curriculum and assessment review, we're looking at what more schools can do, and going beyond that, working with sporting bodies to deliver more.
Joe Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Accessible transport was a major challenge for my constituents, especially accessing rail stations on the Tyne Valley Railway line. Will the Secretary of State work with the Department for Transport to ensure that Great British Railways put disabled access at the heart of their plans?
Mr. Speaker, yes, we will. Accessibility is at the heart of the government's passenger-focused approach, and with a unified rail network, we'll be able to meet accessibility needs more reliably and consistently and plan how best to improve accessibility across the entire network.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've had a number. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've had a number of commitments to the implementation of the CAST review from the government. I'm wondering if the government would commit to ensuring that trans people do get access to the health care that they need, and to ensuring that those waiting lists are brought down as soon as possible.
Minister.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for raising this question, and she is absolutely right to point to the very long waiting list that many people currently experience, and I know that the Health Secretary is focused on this issue as well as more broadly on LGBT health, indeed health for everyone, as part of our mission to get the NHS off the floor, back off its knees and working for everyone in our country. Thank you.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Gagan Mahindra. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, this House marked the one-year anniversary of the horrific attacks on October the 7th. And I take this opportunity to reiterate that the hostages must be released. And I reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon. Mr. Speaker, this week the government will deliver on our promise to the British people of the biggest upgrade to workers' rights in a generation. The Employment Rights Bill will ensure work pays, it'll forge a new partnership with business and reset the dreadful industrial relations that have cost our economy and our NHS so much in recent years. We are also preparing for the International Investment Summit next week, bringing hundreds of global CEOs to the UK and unlocking billions of pounds in investment. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Gagan Mahindra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The commitment of £400 million in funding for a new hospital at Watford General was one of the many brilliant things of the previous Conservative government. And my good friend, the former Member of Parliament for Watford, Dean Russell, did, and would have been life-changing as well as life-saving for so many of my constituents. Why is the Prime Minister cancelling this funding commitment and spending billions of pounds giving pay rises to train drivers instead?
Prime Minister.
Because the promise of 40 new hospitals didn't involve 40, didn't involve hospitals, they weren't new and they weren't funded.
Sarah Combs.
One of the biggest issues in my West Bromwich constituency is poor access to GP services. Our GP satisfaction rate is 15% below the national average. So can I thank the government for their focus on improving this situation and ask the Prime Minister what the government's doing to make sure that everyone in West Bromwich can actually see their GP?
Well, I thank her for her question. The most visible sign of failure of the last government was the NHS. And we are going to expand the role of community pharmacies and accelerate the rollout of independent prescribers. We need much more care to be delivered in local communities to spot problems earlier, and we'll train thousands more GPs. We were elected to change the country, and that means getting the NHS back on its feet. And my honourable friend, the Chancellor, will have much more to say about that in the budget, about fixing the foundations of our economy so we can put money in people's pockets, fix our public services and rebuild Britain.
Leader of the Opposition, Rishi Sunak.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow the government will publish their anticipated changes to employment law. Given the weekend's events, given the weekend's events, when did the Prime Minister first become a convert to fire and rehire?
Well, I'm very pleased and proud that tomorrow we will publish the bill which will be the biggest upgrade of workers' rights in a generation. And that'll do two things, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, it will give people basic dignity at work. And secondly, it will help grow our economy, something that the last government absolutely failed on for 14 long years.
The opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when he talks about security at work, once again, it's one rule for him and another rule for everyone else. But I know that not everything or everyone has survived his first 100 days in government. So can he confirm that when he promised not to raise income tax, national insurance or VAT, that commitment applies to both employer and employee national insurance contributions?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, as he well knows, I'm not going to get drawn on decisions that will be set out. We made an absolute commitment in relation to not raising tax on working people. He, of course, was the expert's expert on raising taxes. And what did we get in return for it? We got a broken economy, broken public services, and a £22 billion black hole in the economy. We're here to stabilise the economy, and we will do so.
Leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think even Lord Ali is buying any of that nonsense. But I'm not asking, Mr. Speaker. I'm not asking about the budget. I'm not asking about the budget. I'm asking specifically. I'm asking specifically about the promise he made to the British people. So let me ask him again, just to clarify his own promise. Does his commitment not to raise national insurance apply to both employee and employer national insurance contributions?
We set out our promises in our manifesto. We returned with a huge majority to change the country for the better. And I stick to my promises in the manifesto. But I notice it's question 3, and he hasn't yet welcomed the investment into this country. We've had in recent months £8 billion from Amazon for jobs across the country, £10 billion from Blackstone's jobs across the North East, £22 billion on carbon capture jobs in the North East and the North West, 500 million, Mr. Speaker, for UK buses in Northern Ireland. While we're investing in our economy, what are they doing? They're arguing about whether to scrap maternity pay.
Leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to welcome investments that this government negotiated, but when it comes to his answer on tax, Mr. Speaker, businesses across the country would have found his answer just about as reassuring as Sue Gray did when he promised to protect her job, Mr. Speaker. So let me turn. It's no wonder confidence is plummeting on his watch, which he didn't mention, but turning to another commitment. Before the election, his Chancellor said changing the debt target in the fiscal rules would be tantamount to fiddling the figures. Does he still agree with the Chancellor?
Prime Minister.
This is literally the man who was in charge of the economy. 14 years they crashed the economy. And what did they leave? A £22 billion black hole in the economy. Unlike them, we won't walk past it, we will fix it, and it's only because we're stabilising the economy that we are getting the investment into this country. But I still notice he hasn't really talked about that investment. We're powering ahead with clean British energy. We're changing the rules to build 1.5 million homes and returning railways to public ownership. And they've got nothing to say about any of this.
Mr. Speaker, on debt, we left them the second lowest debt in the G7, Mr. Speaker. And as the Institute of Fiscal Studies have said...
Order. I will hear the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, as the Institute of Fiscal Studies have said, it's hard to escape the suspicion that the government is attracted to this change because it would allow for significantly more borrowing. Now, his Chancellor previously said that this change, and I quote her words, would be fiddling the figures. So it is a simple question. Does he still agree with the Chancellor?
Prime Minister.
I see it's back to his old script. They've never had it so good. That didn't work so well at the election. Might be time to change that. I'm not going to get drawn on issues for the budget, just as he wouldn't when he was standing at this dispatch box. But meanwhile, we're investing, we're building the NHS fit for the future, back on its feet, better opportunities for young people and protections at work. After 14 years of Tory failure, we're giving the country its future back. And that's the difference that Labour delivers.
Mr. Speaker, it is clear he's opened the door to raising employer national insurance contributions, including on pensions, and fiddling the figures that he can borrow more. And he talks about what he's achieved. Well, economic confidence is plummeting, growth is now stalling, and the UK's borrowing costs are rising on his watch, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, can I close on another important topic? Because yesterday's intervention from the head of MI5 will have been sobering for the whole House, and not least his warning that Britain faces the most complex and interconnected threats in our country's history. Now, I know the Prime Minister will agree with me that we all owe our security services a debt of gratitude for what they do to keep us safe. But can the Prime Minister confirm that the forthcoming terrorism bill will give our security services the powers they need to tackle evolving threats? And I can assure him of our constructive support on these vital questions of national security in the same spirit that he provided that support to me.
Prime Minister.
Well, I can confirm that we will give the security forces and services the powers that they need, and I hope that is a shared objective across the House. They do an incredibly important job for us. But he talks about the economy. It's a real shame the party opposite can't simply... Well, he did at the beginning of his question a moment ago. Listen on. It's a shame they can't celebrate Britain's success under this government. Of course we've got to take tough decisions. But when investment is pouring in, as it has been in recent weeks, when the NHS strikes are coming to an end, when houses are getting built, we're delivering the biggest upgrade of workers' rights in a generation. It's time for them to accept that we're fixing the foundations. So whilst they fight amongst themselves in the comfort zone of unfunded promises, threatening to scrap the minimum wage, we're going to get on with the job of clearing up the mess that they made and fighting a better country that people are crying out for.
Adam Jogi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, cancer is hard on the patient and it's hard on their families, as my family knows all too well this year. Can I ask the Prime Minister to commit to doing all he can to improve research, early diagnosis and patient care for those with cancer? And will he join me in thanking the NHS staff who've looked after my dad in recent weeks and thousands of cancer patients like him in Newcastle-on-Lyme and up and down our United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
I was sorry to hear about my honourable friend's father, and I think we would all pass him our best wishes. Cancer is another example of the dreadful state the last government left the NHS in. The Darzi report published just a few weeks ago showed that some cancer standards have not been met since 2015, and no progress was made in diagnosing cancer at stage 1 and stage 2 between 2013 and 2021. So I'm really pleased that we've just announced £6.4 million research network developing new AI software to identify cancer early. We will get the NHS catching cancer on time, diagnosing it earlier and treating it faster.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Across this House, we all agree that we need to get our economy growing strongly again so we can improve people's lives and raise the money for our public services. Liberal Democrats believe that one of the best ways of doing that is to improve our relationship with our European neighbours on things like trade, and I welcome the fact that the Prime Minister has made this a priority in his first few weeks. But what I just don't understand is that he's ruled out negotiating a youth mobility scheme with our European partners. This could be so good for young people, for businesses, and for re-establishing that relationship. So will he reconsider this?
Prime Minister.
Well, he's right. We do need a better deal with the EU than the bad deal we got under the last government. And that's why I was very pleased to meet the President of the Commission last week to talk about how we can improve on the deal. In our manifesto, we had clear red lines about the single market, customs union, freedom of movement, and we will negotiate with those red lines in place.
David.
Well, I'm disappointed about the youth mobility scheme. Maybe we can come back to that. But he's right to say one of the many problems for our economy coming from the dreadful Brexit deal was the red tape that's been put on businesses. Now, there are many examples of that, Mr. Speaker, but a new example came to me earlier this week, and it affects fishermen in the Falklands, who are otherwise having to pay huge amounts in tariffs to be able to sell their produce into the European market, or sail under a Spanish flag. So when the Prime Minister renegotiates the trade deal, can you remember the overseas territories? And ensure that British citizens fishing off the Falklands can sail proudly under the Union Jack?
Prime Minister.
My uncle nearly lost his life when his ship was torpedoed defending the Falklands. They are British, and they will remain British. And sovereignty in Gibraltar is equally not to be negotiated. Of course, we will do everything we can to make it easier for all businesses to trade more freely so that we can grow our economy. I'm very, very clear about the Falklands. It's personal to me.
John Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Conservative-led Derbyshire County Council are proposing to cut adult day centres and care homes across Derbyshire. Yeah. My constituent, Pat, was diagnosed with dementia in 2016. The Jubilee Centre in New Mills is a lifeline for her and her family. She always returns happier, less confused and less anxious. And for her partner David and main carer, it provides vital respite while she's there. They do not know how they'll survive without it. Will the Prime Minister join with me in asking the Conservatives on Derbyshire County Council to think again and oppose these devastating cuts to older people and their families?
Well, I'm shocked to hear of the impact on Derbyshire Council that he's just described, who are proposing cutbacks on adult social care. And councils across the country were at the front line of the last government's ruinous economic failure. It's left people who rely on services counting the cost. Now, there's no quick fix to this, but we will provide councils with more stability and certainty through multi-year funding settlements, ensuring councils can plan their finances for the future properly. And we will work with local leaders to deliver this.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Any sense of unease that though he is the Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, there are over 300 areas of law in Northern Ireland where the legislation is made in a foreign parliament. Has the Prime Minister any ambition of recovering UK sovereignty over those 300 areas of law and thereby restoring the equal citizenships of my constituents and ending their disenfranchising in respect of making laws that govern much of their economy?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for raising that issue, which of course is an important issue. The Windsor framework was negotiated by the last government. We supported it, and we continue to support it, and will work to make sure it's implemented properly and fully.
Dame McHillier.
Mr. Speaker, 1 in 2 children in my constituency live in poverty after housing costs are taken into account. So I welcome the government's commitment to tackling child poverty. But we all know that every year of poverty has a long-term impact. So could the Prime Minister tell us that the welcome child poverty task force, which is underway, could he tell us when he expects that to report so we can see action?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for a very important question. It is appalling that child poverty went up 700,000 since 2010. And after the last Labour government did so much to bring it down, and tackling this is at the heart of our mission to break down the barriers to opportunity. The task force is developing the strategy to reduce child poverty, and it will be published in spring of next year.
Shavanda Raji.
Speak for Leicester.
The Prime Minister's decision to impose VAT on independent schools strips hard-working families of the choice for what is best for their children, while risking job losses for teachers, increasing class sizes, and squeezing state school resources to their absolute limit. With these impending threats, what actions is the Prime Minister taking to mitigate these effects if he is not undertaking an impact assessment to understand them?
I do understand that many parents across the country save hard to be able to send their children to private school because they have aspiration for their children. So does every parent who sends their children to a state school. And the problem we have is we don't have enough teachers in key subjects in our state secondary school. Now, the party opposite may be prepared to tolerate that. I'm not. And that's why we've made this change to fund 6,500 teachers. And they chunter on. But they have to answer the question, which none of them are answering. If they're not going to make this change, are they going to leave our state secondaries without the teachers they need? Or are they going to cut the education budget by £1.5 billion? Which is it?
Mr. Speaker, Gloucester has a proud military history, from the Battle of Imjin River to RAF Quedgley and the Glorious Gloucesters. In fact, almost 10% of Gloucester households are home to a veteran. So can the Prime Minister update this House on what this government is doing to support veterans, and in particular how he will meet his promise to make sure that every veteran in Gloucester has a roof over their head?
Prime Minister. We owe an enormous debt to all of our veterans, and it was a great honour to announce at our party conference that our plans to build new homes across the country will ensure that homeless veterans are at the front line of the queue for new social housing, recognise the incredible sacrifice and contribution that they make. We will repay all those who served us and house all veterans in housing needs, ensuring homes are there for heroes. We're also ensuring veterans have access to support, including with mental health and employment.
Sir Julian Smith.
Mr. Speaker, special education needs budgets in North Yorkshire and across the UK are under huge pressure. Could I ask the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, as they prepare for the budget, could they look carefully at how increased funding and changes to the funding formula could make a massive difference to thousands of lives of children across the country?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable member for raising this issue, which is of real concern across the country to many parents who are concerned about the provision. And I do agree that children with special educational needs and disabilities are being failed, with parents struggling to get their children the support that they need and deserve. And we have to change that. I'm determined to raise standards for every child so they succeed in education. And we will work with the sector and across the House where we can to deliver on that mission, which is very important for many parents who will be watching this today.
Look, Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Prime Minister's focus on economic growth, and I look forward to the International Investment Summit next week. One area where constituents across the country want to see thrive is their local high street, and the Prime Minister will know from his own visit to the top of town in Basingstoke that it has huge potential, but it's not what it could be. Could I ask the Prime Minister what support this government will give to ensure that high streets across the country are able to grow and thrive?
Prime Minister. Well, I do remember that visit, and here's the new political vibe. Invest with Labour or decline with the Tories. And that's why I was very pleased to read out the investments we've had in the last few weeks. We've got a big summit coming up on Monday, hundreds of CEOs coming, and I'm confident we'll be making further such investment announcements in weeks to come. And that is what will fix our economy, stabilise our economy. It's because we're taking the tough decisions. The investment is now flowing into this country, fulfil on our obligation to raise living standards across the country.
Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much.
much, Mr. Speaker. The A483 runs through my constituency from Llanymynech to Oswestry, and it's one of the busiest and most dangerous roads in the constituency. And National Highways say that the crossroads at Llwnclwys is the worst accident black spot in the Midlands. They've got a proposal to improve the situation, but Treasury rules place a higher value on road speed than they do on the lives of North Shropshire's residents. So will the Prime Minister look at flexing these rules to back National Highways and back my residents to give them the safe road they deserve?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable member for raising this, and it's obviously a really big, important issue in her constituency. And it is vital that as we invest, we do improve safety and deliver better journeys for drivers. National Highways, I think, is continuing to study the case for safety improvements to the A483 and will continue to do so. Decisions, as you probably know, will be set out under the third road investment strategy. And I know that the Roads Minister will have heard her representations, and I'm sure will agree to a meeting if that is what you'd like.
Phil Brickle.
Bolton Hospice provides vital services to individuals with life-limiting conditions. Yet, like hospices across the country, it faces a difficult financial future and is reliant on fundraising, including the kind donations I was able to raise when I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro last year, and from the campaign run by the local paper, the Bolton News. Can the Prime Minister tell me what steps he is taking to ensure hospices like the one in Bolton are put on a sustainable financial footing?
Well, look, can I first congratulate him on his efforts in relation to the local hospice. We want everyone to have access to high-quality care and end-of-life care. And that is why we require all local NHS bodies to commission services from hospices to meet the needs of their local populations. Most hospices are charitable, independent organisations who also receive funding for providing NHS services. We have inherited a huge problem with the £22 billion black hole, but nonetheless, we are determined to move forward on this.
Mr. Speaker, since the signing of the Belfast Agreement in 1998, more people in Northern Ireland have now sadly lost their lives to suicide than those that were killed during the 30 years of the Troubles. Would the Prime Minister agree that the challenges with poor mental health in Northern Ireland, some of which are directly related to the violence of our past, is a unique and pressing legacy of the Troubles? So would he therefore commit to tasking his government to work collaboratively with the Department of Health in Northern Ireland to explore how these issues can be properly recognised and resolved?
Well, I thank him for raising this important issue. I do know firsthand the deep impact that the Troubles have had on so many in Northern Ireland, but we must ensure that those with mental health issues receive the support and the care that they need. Now, public services obviously devolved in Northern Ireland, but we will work with the executive and leaders to support them in delivering better outcomes, which is why my Secretary of State for Health spoke to the Health Minister in Northern Ireland in the first week he was in the department. And I'm sure that he'd be prepared to follow up should the honourable member wish so.
Joe Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency of Hexham, frightened parents and their families having to fight tooth and nail and travel extremely long distances to secure fair treatment and full education for their children. Can the Prime Minister outline the steps that the government will take to improve outcomes and results for SEND families, particularly in the most rural parts of the North East?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for his question. I think this reinforces that the SEND provisions were a failure of the last government, particularly in rural communities. This has come from both sides of the House. It's a really important issue. We have a duty now to pick this up and to ensure that all children with SEND receive the right support to succeed in their education, and we will continue to do so.
David Davis.
On the assisted dying private members' bill, the government's quite rightly staying neutral. But the real issue with that bill is the time constraints of private legislation make it very difficult to get it right first time. If we get this wrong first time, the consequences are too terrible to contemplate. In 1967, the government of the day gave the government time to allow David Steele's abortion bill to go through. Would the Prime Minister commit to giving extra time, out of government time, to this bill to ensure that we get this right first time?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for raising this question on a really important issue. And I do understand there are strongly held views across the House and on both sides and within both sides, if I can put it in that way. I do agree with him that it is important that we ensure that any change to the law, if there is to be one, is effective. Now, if this House gives the bill a second reading, it will, of course, then go to the committee as usual, which will allow that more detailed scrutiny. But we do need the discussion more broadly on this important issue.
No law.
With shared prosperity funding drawing to a close and Cornwall having some of the greatest potential in Europe in critical minerals and renewable energy, it's time for our aspiring Celtic tiger to identify much more strategic sources of investment funding which take us away from the short-termist begging bowl politics of the last decade. Will the Prime Minister meet with the Cornish MPs to discuss the future of industrial and social funding in Cornwall?
Minister. Well, my honourable friend is a proud Cornish MP and is absolutely right that economic growth must be spread across the country. It cannot simply be focused in the South East and London. And he'll have seen today, no doubt, the Floating Offshore Wind Taskforce report, which sets out that the UK's industry can support tens of thousands of jobs, including huge opportunities, job opportunities in the South West. And I will ensure that a meeting is arranged with him, with the appropriate minister.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Today's plans have awareness day, a paediatric condition that affects thousands of children potentially across the UK. I first raised it in this chamber 18 months ago when I heard about the devastating impact from a constituent. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that it should not be for a charity to fund the pathway analysis and research that is needed to ensure that people and children get the support that they need? And will he help facilitate a meeting for me with the charity and the Department for Health?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I first thank her for raising this important issue and reminding the House of the impact that it has. And certainly, I think I can arrange that meeting so we can take that further forward. Thank you.
Mary Kelly-Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Constituents in the City of Durham are anxious about the financial situation at Durham County Council. The Tories' unfair funding formula has seen essential public services hollowed out, such as social care, whilst the demand is increasing. So what assurances can the Prime Minister give me that essential services will be restored and that a new funding formula will be genuinely a fair one, focusing on the needs of my constituents, especially the most vulnerable?
Prime Minister.
Well, she highlights yet another failing of the last government, because successive years of underfunding have left councils experiencing significant budget pressures, and that's felt by constituents and residents and individuals across the country. This government will clear up the mess, will get councils back on their feet. Partly, multi-year funding settlements will help to allow longer-term work to be done. But we recognise the importance of councils. They know their communities best, and with greater stability we can support them in ensuring the services that they provide get to the people that need it.
Caroline Dinich.
In April, over 50 homes and businesses in Gosport found themselves underwater when Storm Pediatric hit. Some have still not been able to return to their properties, and it's now been upgraded to a 1 in 20-year risk. We still haven't had a decision from the Environment Agency about flood and coastal erosion risk management funding, which we've applied for. And despite requests, I still haven't been able to secure a meeting with his DEFRA team. Winter is coming. My constituents are worried. When is he going to grip this?
Prime Minister.
Well, look, this is a really important issue in terms of... Well, look, we're not going to take lessons from the party opposite. Year after year after year, we visited constituencies and areas which were flooded because there had been a failure to take adequate protection. So I won't take lectures. What I said in the election campaign is that we would set up a flood resilience task force to get ahead of this. We will do that, and I'll ensure that she can get such further information as she needs.
Dawn Butler, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. October is Black History Month, and the theme this year is reclaiming the narrative. I want to thank Mr. Speaker for the event that you will be doing in your apartments with the Temptations and the Prime Minister. will be having an event in number 10 this evening. Will the Prime Minister agree with me that it's important that we continue to have a debate on the floor of this House in government's time on Black History Month?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Well, I'm not sure just at the moment going to something that's labelled Temptations is quite where I need to go. Look, this is a really important initiative. There will be. It is important it's being marked, and I'm very pleased to be hosting the event this evening, to which I think she is coming. Thank you.
Right, that completes Prime Minister's questions. Right, we now come to the urgent question. Alex Buckhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland if he will make a statement on the Northern Ireland city deals.
Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As the Chancellor set out in July, the Government has inherited a £22 billion black hole in the public finances. As a result, the Treasury is having to consider a range of measures to deal with this significant problem. Last month, the Treasury informed the Northern Ireland Department of Finance that the UK Government's contributions to the Mid-South West and Causeway Coast and Glens deals will now be considered as part of the spending review. The Belfast Regional City deal and the Derry-London Derry and Strabane City deal are unaffected and are proceeding as planned. Since the announcement of the pause on these two deals, I have met with the First and Deputy First Minister, the Chief Secretary and I have met the Northern Ireland Finance Minister, and I will also be meeting the Chief Executives of these two deals shortly. Everyone in Northern Ireland understands their importance to economic growth and encouraging investment, and this government is committed to working with the Northern Ireland executive and businesses to make the most of the huge economic opportunities that now lie ahead. This is shown by the progress being made on the Belfast and the Derry-London Derry and Strabane City deals. I attended the Derry and Strabane City deal signing on the 18th of September, and the UK Government's £105 million investment will help progress transformative projects in innovation, digital and health projects, which will build on the region's well-established research excellence. Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor will set out the results of the first phase of the spending review on the 30th of October, which will include an update on the two outstanding city deals.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for granting this urgent question. As the House will know, on the evening of Friday the 13th of September, the day after we went into recess, the Government took it upon itself to make a number of announcements affecting Northern Ireland. These were the cancellation of the Casement Park project, the decision that Sean Brown's family will not be given a public inquiry into his murder, and the subject of today's urgent question, the pausing of 4 Northern Ireland city deals. It's quite something, Mr. Speaker, to be able to instantaneously unite all of the political parties in Northern Ireland, but this was a feat achieved by the Government on the evening of Friday the 13th. The House will be aware of how important the city deals are. They're crucial because they provide significant investment to boost economic growth, create jobs and enhance infrastructure, bringing together Westminster, Belfast, local councils and private investment. We're very pleased that the following day, after a considerable amount of confusion, the Government U-turned and announced the Belfast region and Derry and Strabane deals would go ahead.
But the other two, Causeway Coast and Glens growth deal and Mid-South West region growth deal, now sit in limbo. Critically, they cover areas which haven't had the same levels of investment in recent years as big cities. One only needs to look at the empty shops in Enniskillen and Armagh to understand that these deals are badly needed. So please can the Secretary of State tell the House, why was the decision made to pause taken at the time it was, and why was it announced in the way that it was? Following that announcement, why was there then a U-turn on two of the deals, but not on the other two? What criteria were used to make that decision? Now, I know the Secretary of State has referred to money, and he knows that the so-called black hole, which the government has provided no breakdown, is obviously partially of Labour's making, given the above-inflation pay rise it's chosen to award to the unions. The Secretary of State will know that the money involved is, in the world of the Exchequer, not that significant and, crucially, will deliver major returns to Northern Ireland and to the UK. So I ask him for two things. First, an apology for how this was handled. I know that he would not have wanted this to happen in the way that it did, but I do think someone should take responsibility for the way in which the House and the people of Northern Ireland have been treated. And second, that in negotiations with the Treasury in the run-up to the budget, he will be the lead advocate for unpausing those city deals.
Secretary of State. Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his response. Just to say on Casement Park, since he did raise it, we took the decision for the reason we set out. I think it's one that he supports. Sean Brown, I set out in my letter to the family why I had reached the conclusion that I had. I would just correct him, Belfast City was never affected at all. It's roaring ahead. It's a great success. And in the case of Derry, I was pleased to announce, to attend the signing of the deal, and that will now progress to the next stage of it. I would simply say to the honourable gentleman, the inheritance that the last government left us when it comes to the public finances, the last government made a load of promises and never identified where the money to pay for them was going to come from. And then it was turfed out and left this government with the problem of dealing with it. And it is for that reason why these two city deals, and the honourable gentleman can rest assured that I, as the Secretary of State, will continue to make the case for the two city deals, which is why I said in my opening answer to him, everybody in Northern Ireland, including myself, understands the importance of them. I'll continue to make that case. But in those circumstances, the Chancellor has found it necessary to look at a whole range of commitments that were made by the last government for which no funding had been identified, and the fault for that doesn't lie with us, and if any apologies are required, a belated apology from the other side for the mess they left us would be much appreciated.
Chair of the Select Committee, Tony Antoniazzi.
Cities and towns in Northern Ireland have already missed out on levelling up funding under the previous government, which I saw firsthand as Shadow Minister. So the uncertainty regarding the city deals has been quite a hard hit on the people in Northern Ireland. But I'd like to seek further reassurances that the Secretary of State could give the people of Northern Ireland so they're not overlooked in the budget.
Secretary of State.
Well, I absolutely recognise the uncertainty this is created, and as I indicated, I will be meeting the chief executives of the two deals very shortly. And I think in particular, the problem that they face is, given the uncertainty while we await the outcome of the first phase of the spending review, is a lot of effort goes in to progressing these deals with the private partners, because the money comes from the government and it comes from the Northern Ireland Executive in the form of match funding, and then other partners, including the local councils. And it is a difficult position that they find themselves in, and I'm not going to hide from that. The only thing I would say is that, of course, these two deals, much further back in the process than Belfast and Derry, because in the case of Causeway Coast and Glens, the heads of terms had been signed. That was in April of this year. In the case of Mid-South West, the heads of terms had yet to be signed. They were due, I think, last month. And then there is a further process that goes on under which the programme of the deal itself is developed to then get to the stage that Derry reached on the 18th of September when the financial agreement is signed, and then business case and the projects are unlocked. So I recognise that it's difficult, and as I've already indicated to the Council, I will continue to argue the cause of these deals.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Al Pinkerton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 4 city and growth deals for Northern Ireland are critical mechanisms in revitalising industries and creating new economic opportunities across key regions in Northern Ireland. The pause in the UK government's funding has caused, in the Secretary of State's own admission, uncertainty, anxiety and lost impetus on key investment projects under the City and Growth Deals framework. The Mid-South West deal, for example, represents over £250 million in investment across the region. The decision to allow projects in Belfast and Derry to proceed, whilst pausing those in Mid-South West and Causeway regions, risks reproducing the very imbalances that these deals were designed to tackle, widening inequities and widening inequalities across Northern Ireland. I've had the opportunity to speak to the Honourable Member for Lagan Valley, who has brought to my attention the risks posed to the Agri-Bio Innovation Centre in Dromore, for example, by the government's withdrawal of secure funding. So on behalf of Northern Irish businesses, councils and residents, especially those in those paused regions, can I ask the Secretary of State the following? What actions are the government taking to mitigate those regional economic imbalances and to tackle inequalities, especially in the Mid-South West? And what assurances can be provided that rural areas will not be forgotten, especially again in the Mid-South West and indeed in Causeway Side?
Can I just say you're allowed 1 minute? And you're well over, so I'm sure you're coming to the end at this very second.
And I shall leave it there, Mr. Speaker, with thanks.
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. I welcomed him to his post because I think it's the first time we've faced each other. He makes a fair point about the areas covered by the 2 deals that have been paused and the contrast between that and Derry and Strabane and Belfast. And it's very important that in the end we see economic growth right across Northern Ireland. So I don't dissent from the proposition that he's put. But the reason why we're in this difficulty is because of the legacy the government has found, and any responsible chancellor in those circumstances has got to find a way of straightening out the public finances that were left to us in a really, really bad state.
Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is not the sort of person who would make this announcement unless there was huge pressure to do so. But I'm very aware that pausing a project, especially when you've got people in post, isn't completely cost-free. So can he reassure the House and people in Northern Ireland that there will be some way of maintaining a degree of momentum on the projects that have been paused? And if he can give us any costings on that, that would be helpful.
Well, my honourable friend makes a really important point, and the House may have seen that yesterday the Northern Ireland Executive, whose funding is secure because of the deal that was offered, including the financial deal as part of the restoration of the institution, something the whole House welcomes, announced that it is proceeding with its share of the contribution, which I hope will offer some comfort to those in the 2 city deal areas who are working out what does this mean now. The second point I would make to the House is it's really important that clarity about what the future is going to be is delivered as quickly as possible, which is why I set out that we'll learn more on the 30th of October.
Julian Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I speak up for these city deals which have been subject to a significant amount of work in communities across Northern Ireland, and also to highlight the fact that when these city deals were reviewed earlier in the year under the last government, at the time of the Safeguarding the Union agreement, the decisions made then were really part of that deal, and I just would urge the Secretary of State, as well as the representations he's making on the deals themselves, to bear in mind that actually this was discussed earlier in the year and was part of the overall agreement to get Stormont back up and running.
Well, I will absolutely take what the right honourable gentleman has said, given his long experience in these matters and the role that he and many others have played in assisting the restoration of the institution. All I would very gently observe is if it was reviewed then, it didn't quite make its way into the fiscal inheritance that we have found ourselves left with. And that is the cause of the problem. It's not a lack of support for the importance of these deals, because I think the whole House shares that. It's the fiscal problem that is the cause.
Mr. Speaker, city deals are a serious tool for economic growth. That's why the SDLP initially proposed them and why we continue to be their champion. They support skills and employability, create decent jobs, and crucially they leverage private and foreign direct investment and will drive much needed regeneration and infrastructure in parts of Northern Ireland that have been overlooked. While I'm pleased the Government is honouring its commitments to Belfast and Derry, it should know that the decision and the announcement on a Friday night caused very serious frustration and loss of public trust in Northern Ireland, although the Tories do still have a thing or two to teach about uniting the parties in revulsion at their announcements. Can he clarify the reasons for the pause in the city, in the Causeway Coast and Glens and the South West region deals, and can he assure us that he will be a champion for the deals with Treasury?
Well, I will indeed be that champion. Can I take this opportunity to congratulate my honourable friend on assuming the leadership of her party? We all wish her well in that endeavour and express our appreciation to the former leader of the SDLP, who is sitting next to her. Look, let's be frank here. When there is bad news that is forced upon the government, the truth is, whenever it was announced, it would have been unwelcome.
Gavin Robinson.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State will know that while city deals were talked of for a long time, it was 2017 in the Democratic Unionist Party that got a commitment from government that would not impact us, but be of benefit to everyone in Northern Ireland, creating the opportunities for growth in cities and regions throughout Northern Ireland in a phased and a programmed and a sensible strategic way. The decision that was made to pause both Causeway Coast and Glens in the Mid-South West region were unnecessary, and the Secretary of State, I think, accepts that. When there wasn't a position in place to agree the financial requirements necessary, there was no need to pause them because of lack of finance. But what he has done, and I think he acknowledges, is that this decision places in jeopardy the match funding from private investors, that puts in jeopardy the ability to proceed with the Food and Drug Development Centre in Coleraine or the Enniskillen Bypass and a myriad of other important and strategically significant proposals. So injecting confidence at this time, as we wait until the 30th of October, would be to suggest that A, this government recognises the important value of city deals, B, is determined to deliver on the aspirations that will be key significant regional economic drivers in Northern Ireland, and 3, recognise, as I think he does, that to pause these proposals was foolish.
Well, I don't agree with his last proposition, because